Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 485. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 485. And man, do we have a treat for you today. In this episode, our instructors, Matt Scott, Joe Hulsey, and Michael Roper, and myself are going to be doing a roundtable discussion. This is a new format for us. It's something that I thought would be real interesting for us to look at the different news that's going on in the building automation space right now, in the HVAC space, and to be bringing our thoughts on that to you all. So let us know, in the comments section. Let us know if you like this new format. Tell us, would you prefer a different format? As always, everything will be available at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/485. Once again, that is podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/485. And as always, we provide this to you every week for free. So if you find it valuable, please consider going to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, leaving us a 5-star review, liking and subscribing on YouTube, or sharing this if you're watching on LinkedIn. Just click on the share button and comment accordingly. So with that being said, let's dive into the episode. Alrighty, folks, we're doing something completely different here. We have the entire training team from Smart Buildings Academy, and we're going to be doing a roundtable podcast episode where we talk about a bunch of topics that we may or may not know anything about, and we're going to have fun doing it. So I've got Joe Hulsey. So I'm going to go right to left. I've got Joe Hulsey, who is with our team. He has an experience running an HVAC company as well as an HVAC program prior to coming to Smart Buildings Academy. We've got Matt, and Matt is coming to us from multiple different engineering roles. He's a professional engineer, background in mechanical engineering, most recently doing audits in the insurance space on equipment failures. And then we've got Michael Roper. Michael is here, and he comes from a very interesting background, being a middle school / late elementary school teacher.
No, that was high school. I didn't teach elementary. I can't do elementary school. There's no way.
He said we may or may not know what we're talking about.
I don't clean up vomit and wipe noses. I didn't do that. But I did teach high school, and that was a challenge.
He was in very early education, teaching.
I did.
So he did online high school physics, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, see, I do remember
physics. Yep.
And something else.
A lot of different subjects.
So, but physics sounds cool. So we're going to stick with that. And before that, worked in multiple different roles at Trane, Lennox, Johnson Controls, heavy on the engineering and estimating and sales side of things. With that being said, let's dive in to our first topic, indoor air quality and what it looks like in the future. Who wants to go first?
Well, I guess I'll go ahead and start that topic. So I like studying up on indoor air quality. The trend that we've seen a lot, though, that's kind of disturbing is when people just try to put in a lot of different flashing lights up there. Has anyone ever seen those? Like UV lights or things that look like, little spaceships that go in there that are supposed to ionize the air or do all these different things. There's really hard to get a hold of any good research on that stuff. Most of it is just kind of sales tactics. They have an independent party who claims that they reduce this, reduce that. I don't know if any of y'all ever ran into that in either the commercial building world, or you ever see that anywhere else. What are your thoughts on those?
How about you, Matt?
Yep.
IAQ, are you talking ionization?
Oh yeah,
UV. Any of the sterilization.
Really sure. I mean, I actually didn't really come across a lot of that. I didn't see a ton of radiation or anything like that, or UV stuff. So that wasn't really something that was, when I was designing, something that was taken into consideration.
Yep.
I saw it.
Go ahead, Phil.
I saw it a lot from the perspective of there was government dollars for the technologies, especially during COVID. Yeah.
Right.
And like, I wonder, because needlepoint was the huge thing, the needlepoint ionization.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it was weird when you'd put an ionization solution in a building and you'd come back the next day and there was like particle dust on all the tables. So it was doing something.
Yeah.
And UV, if the airflow's slow enough, like UV is good for coils or filters, but not for airflow because it has to have exposure. And I don't know if any of you all want to talk to that, but I think people need to understand that each one of these applications has different constraints, and people don't get that, it seems like.
Yep. Well,
I
mean, definitely seeing more like healthcare facilities, nursing home facilities, and things like that, where it's critical, where they need fresh, clean air. They're also, as Joe probably knows too, he's probably worked on them in rooftop or package units. They're maintenance nightmares, so, and they're very expensive to replace. And, just to explain that to the customer, the juice better be worth the squeeze putting those things in,
Yeah, and going back to what Phil said, a lot of people don't realize that the UV lights, they're only good for the, within a very small distance of what they're striking. They have to continually be on there. If you do a study where it says it can kill 99% of bacteria in 30 seconds, right? Well, how fast is air moving across that light? Like what, a tenth of a second, half a second, whatever it is. So you're not killing anything in the air. You're only killing the surface that light is hitting.
Yeah.
So, and even at that, it's just, again, the line of sight, what it's striking. And they also degrade over time the specific type of UV that's going to break down that bacteria, that mold, whatever you have. So are you measuring that? We did have like Geiger counters in some of the federal buildings we worked in to see how potent they still were. Otherwise, you replaced them like every 6 months or something. Maybe not. Wait, with Geiger counters. Yeah, in case there's earthquakes or something. No, what are they called?
That's for
radiation counters. Yeah.
Yep. A Geiger counter does radiation.
It does.
Yep.
Okay. Did I get it right?
Now,
all right. Good.
I'm wondering, like, what's the difference, or what's the benefit versus UV lights versus HEPA filters, or is it the same thing? Doesn't HEPA filters filter out maybe viruses too, or bacteria in the space?
Yeah,
I wonder what the cost difference is and what the benefit would be versus those two.
Yeah. Well, I think, and Joe and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the issues with HEPA is it's going to increase your fan energy, especially depending on the MRF you use, because it's going to restrict flow. And often systems aren't designed for that restricted flow because they're designed either over capacity or right at capacity. So you got that issue. And then, like my understanding of UV is it's typically post-coil, not pre-coil. Right. I would typically see it in the middle of the unit or in the front of the unit. So you would have like filtration on the return / outsides, and that will capture the big particles, the like, what are they? Like 2.5 and 10, right?
Microns.
Aren't those the big ones?
PM 2.5 are the, you want to go, anything smaller than 2.5 can't come out of your lungs if you breathe it in. Your lungs can't get that out. So 2.5 and larger, we can cough up. Anything smaller than that, we can't. So it's there forever.
Interesting. Yeah. So you got filtration. You've got the ionization, which is supposed to like, ionization, to my understanding, is supposed to be in the space. Like it actually ionizes the space. And that's what you see.
Oh, yeah.
And then there are lights, though, that switch to UV mode. You see this in hospitals that'll switch to UV mode and will like cook a patient room.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Then you definitely could do that. I personally am a fan of filtration first and foremost. Fresh outdoor air and HEPA filters. Again, to Phil's point, a lot of engineers design for it. If they know it's got to be like a clean room, you're going to design for a HEPA filter. But another strategy you'll see is actually putting a HEPA filter in parallel with your ductwork. So all of your air isn't coming across the HEPA filter, but some of it is. So you still have full flow, but you can still be filtering some of that air through that filter. HEPA filter, and then eventually, as it runs long enough, you kind of capture a lot of particles that way. And again, the ionization, typically the idea from my understanding is that you're wanting items to clump together. If you can clump things, they become larger, they stick together, right? And then they can get caught in a filter because now they are large enough because of the ionization. However, my thinking is if they stick to everything, they're going to stick to me as well, right? So,
true.
So they're basically magnets. Now all this bacteria is just sticking right to me.
Yeah. Kind of like your badge was sticking to you when we went in the restaurant. That's a little inside
Well, someone
joke.
was kind enough to tell me to remove my badge in the restaurant. So
Kind is one way to say it. It was a little odd.
awkward.
I do have a question for Michael. So
Sure.
you've taught the most of our workforce development cohorts, which are brand new people. How many people who have previous, because some of them come in with previous HVAC experience, how many of them understand demand control ventilation and ASHRAE 62.1?
They understand. I don't think they know all the finite details of ASHRAE, but they do know they're aware of demand control ventilation and just basically opening up the dampers based on CO2 demand. So they're aware of that, but they might not even know what the term means, but they are aware of CO2 control. A lot of them think it's just CO2 control. These are the guys that have mechanical backgrounds usually. And the guys that don't, they usually have no idea what I'm talking about at first.
That makes sense because I've seen that. And I think that's one of the bigger things, Joe, with IAQ is people understanding ASHRAE 62.1, understanding minimum outside air per occupant or per room type, transient spaces versus permanently occupied. Like this could be a whole, Joe, I'm teeing you up for a future podcast episode.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'm ready for it.
that
I've done some research.
Michael's grabbed it. You're too
we're all
slow,
three
Joe.
going to do
It's a
team
group
one.
discussion.
Yeah, we're going to
Well,
do team.
speaking of, the reason I wanted to bring it up, though, is I think going forward, we're going to see a lot more monitoring of indoor air quality. So as Mike had alluded to, we bring in ventilation for CO2, but it's not necessarily just the CO2 that we're bringing fresh air into. CO2 is measured oftentimes as a proxy for indoor air quality, with the logic being if the CO2 is high, there's probably a lot of other contaminants in there anyway that we need to flush out, right? So there's like the big five things. We have CO2, then we have carbon monoxide, all right? We also have humidity, which we must control, right?
Yep.
And the PM 2.5, as we mentioned before, making sure, and having to, can we monitor it? That's a big deal. Do we have sensors in place that are actually monitoring these things? So I think we'll see more of that going forward, honestly.
Yeah. And this ties to the energy efficiencies because that's the only reason why we use DMV is to decrease the outside air intake, get rid of that humidity that's coming in the building. The CO2 is fine. We don't need to open those dampers anymore. So,
which is a great unplanned segue, Michael, into the DOE halting efficiency standards for appliances.
Oh,
so this is an interesting one that I wasn't even aware was happening.
Yeah. So as of February 14th, they said they were halting these appliances standards for their efficiency. And this is after the DOE and the department before on Biden's administration having some pretty strict energy standards. And they're kind of backing off on that from a consumer standpoint because it's cheaper for people residentially to buy equipment that's obviously maybe less efficient, which we know not necessarily does that save them money in the long term, but it does allow them to buy the equipment up front. And so that, I guess, is driving some of these energy standards.
Interesting. I wonder if that's going to permeate into the commercial sector. And because at AHR, we had a government person come up and was like, hey, let's talk about creating a retro commissioning course if I have a job in 2 weeks. And so I was like, all right, so it's been 2 weeks since AHR. I need to reach out and see if he's still there. But because I wondered that myself for all these companies that service the government, especially there was such a huge energy push Whether people agree or disagree, we're not going to debate that here. But there was a sustainability push in the previous administration and a lot of money attached to that through the Inflation Reduction Act. How do you all see that changing?
Well, with Doge, coming upon the scene, they're going to cut, anything out that they see as waste. And, I think it should be up to the private industry. If they want to save energy upon their own building, then they could do that if they want to. But it is good to save energy and to be green and all that stuff. But ultimately, I think it's the customer's decision, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Yeah. Go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead. Oh, no, I was going to say, so that I guess the ruling is that the Energy Policy and Conservation Act says that the DOE has to look at this every 6 years. And so there is some time periods where it might fluctuate and go back and forth.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things for me where I got stuck previously with the energy was at the end of the day, you can save energy by just turning everything off. Right? Yeah. I mean, people are like, "And we got to save energy."
Your customers will complain.
They would, but I mean, at least you know why they're complaining then.
True. Yeah.
But most of the time, I say that flippantly, but just reducing schedules to not be 24/7.
Yeah.
But I mean, is energy really the goal, or is it better off for us to focus on actually maintaining assets? I advocate that we should be focused on maintaining the systems versus just focusing on some numeric number. That's my 2 cents.
Right. Yeah, because if you go too far, you're going to sacrifice tenant comfort if you shut too many things off. So you got to keep that in mind. That little balance there. Yep.
Yeah. Well, we all know that units that were made 50 years ago, a lot of those are still running, and units that are made 5 years ago have leaks in them, have problems. Because when you try to get better energy efficiency, you stretch your coils a lot thinner. Your heat exchangers on your gas furnaces are a lot thinner. They're not the big heavy duty stuff because it's more efficient heat transfer. But then at the end of the day, it's more failure. So are we really helping ourselves? Right. Are we shooting ourselves in the foot if we're having to manufacture more equipment now? How much is that contributing to the problem rather than helping?
Right. Carbon footprint, cost.
And the greenhouse gas that goes involved in making those. Yep.
Right. Exactly.
That's the thing that's always irritated me about green technologies. And I'm probably going to get us flamed for this. So it was none of y'all's fault when the complaint emails start to come in. It's totally me once again. But the issue I always had with sustainability and all these people pushing these like photovoltaics, EVs, all this stuff is like, you do realize the amount of waste, and let's not even get into like child labor and just all the like rare earth minerals that are done overseas, all that bad juju, which I'm still trying to reconcile as a person. Like I buy devices that I know how they're manufactured. How do I reconcile that without becoming Amish? But at the same time, like this technology, there is a lot of waste. And I feel like we just whitewash that away. And we're like, oh yeah, don't look at the coal plant over there that's powering, all this generation.
Yeah. Well, let's all go electric cars. But then what are we going to power them with? Our grids can't handle it,
Or the batteries when they fail, recycling them. I mean, graphene technology is fascinating.
Sure.
Have y'all heard anything about that, about graphene batteries?
Yes, not a lot.
I've heard a little bit about it. It supposedly has like tremendous energy retention properties, and it's fairly easy to find because graphene's in pencils, right? So,
right.
I mean, it can't be that uncommon.
Sure.
I was just thinking of another thing to add too, is like one thing building owners are going to be aware of is replacement costs, because the cost of equipment's going to be more because of the tariffs. So we want to be able to protect that equipment and make sure everything's tuned up to where we don't break compressors and fans and things like that, because it's going to be probably 25 to 30% more now to get those items until we start making stuff here.
So I want Matt to speak on that for a second. And here's the premise. I've talked to many large organizations that do full coverage PSAs, and they are freaking out right now because they did not build the cost of inflation into their full coverage PSAs.
Yeah.
They built in like a 3% growth of the contract each year. They did not tie materials or labor. So as these pieces of equipment fail, they're freaking out because now it's like 40% more. If they can find the parts. Some of the parts, because of the supply chain degradation, they can't find anymore. So with your past life doing audits from an insurance perspective, what is, and how do I word this without it sounding shady? What is the best way that someone could defend not having to replace a piece of equipment?
I mean, you can repair anything was kind of the mindset that some people have. And as an engineer, it's kind of the way you understand. I mean, you can basically keep the frame of something and replace the compressor, the motor, every single thing inside. And so that was kind of the mentality for some. The best argument for that, though, is time. A lot of times it would take a lot longer for some of this equipment to get to them. And maybe, I mean, some of these lead times for especially like electrical equipment could be a year, 2 years down the line, or they could come in and have it repaired maybe for the same price, but it would reduce their BI or their business interruption because they would be up and running again a lot faster. And so a lot of times they would kind of surpass that. In the insurance world, they would allow that because they're reducing that BI. And so they would be repairing something that probably needed replaced, but they needed to be up and running in, a couple of weeks. And so they would surpass buying something new just to replace or to repair it.
Let me ask it differently. So you're a contractor. You have a full coverage PSA. An owner's claiming that piece of equipment is covered. How do you defend yourself? Because you've seen it from the claim side.
Yeah, right. And a lot of times they claim that it needs replaced when we evaluate it. A lot of times it's like, well, it could be repaired. It doesn't necessarily need to replace. We do a lot of cost evaluation, and if it's close to the repair or replace cost, we would recommend replacing a lot of times in that situation. So I don't know if there's a way to defend that a lot of times.
Let me ask you this, Phil. I'd say, how is it laid out in the contract? How is it specified your repair versus replace terms? Is it kind of Matt's point? Is there a cost?
Question.
The $5,000 rule or whatever, people have their little rules of thumb.
Yeah, there's no rule of thumb when recommending from a consultant standpoint. It was more, there was just a lot of variables that we would look at.
Michael, what were you going to say?
I think it would be like improper use of equipment by the customer, like jumping safeties out, just little things like that. That can be a reason for not to cover, a controller or something like that if it blows it up or something.
Applying 480 to the controller, not that we've seen anyone do that.
Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. That's always like one of, I did a retrofit of a pneumatic unit that had 120 alligator clipped together and shocked myself for the first time. That was awesome.
That feels good.
220 feels better.
So we're talking about reactive. Let's move into the topic of predictive maintenance. So to give a little framework, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different large companies lately, and they've been talking since 2004 or 2008 that I can remember about putting technology on the equipment to report faults, and then these faults would generate predictive work orders and all sorts of stuff. But as I look at the market and I walked AHR, it looks like we are no further along with that than ever before. Why? And what, if anything, is going to change in the next year to two that's going to make this topic any more than a really cool thing to discuss, and it gets people in the sessions, but no one's really doing it?
Yep.
So the first part of that question, why, is cost. If you think about what it takes to troubleshoot, to do predictive maintenance, think about all the different points you have to measure. A lot of them may already be measured, but most of them you only measure if you see a problem and you want to verify or eliminate that as a source of the problem, right? So it would require a tremendous amount of sensors all over a piece of equipment, which just isn't cost effective for a manufacturer. A lot of our VRF or inverter systems, they have, all the alarms on them already. They'll tell you if you have high discharge pressure. They're reading a lot of different points. But they can't really tell you why. I think they need more sensors on it. So that's how I feel the first part. My opinion on the second part, real quick, is if there's a way that we do transition into that, it's the big trend now, AI. When you have a system that can learn, and if you can tie that into all that's going on with it, as far as your pressures, temperatures, whatever, collecting that data and analyzing it.
Right, it'll know when it needs help.
Right.
Yep. I've been doing some research on AI, and it's pretty cool how that works. And it's like Joe said, I think it's a cost thing right now, why people don't use it. And it's also familiarity. Like, a lot of people don't know exactly how it works, and it's very custom per application. So every building is going to be different. They have different HVAC technologies in that building. So all that setup has to be thought of before you could put it into the AI cloud to make sure that this predictive maintenance can be successful.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to predict some of this too. A lot of times, some of these break down. You don't know exactly why or when it was going to happen, and some of that's hard to predict. So maybe the unpredictability is another reason on top of cost.
Yeah. So here's my 2 cents. World according to Phil. I think it's cost, but I think it's cost in that organizations are charging for something that they shouldn't charge for. So I had a conversation with my mentor this morning, and I got super excited just talking about this, and was like, if I had control, I would give this technology away to all my customers embedded in my equipment. I would feed it back into my CRM to do lead gen. I would then have presentations and quotes already built that get sent to the sales rep to present to the customer. And then I would measure the close rate of what fault generates the greatest close rate, which presentation and proposal generate the highest close rate. I'd really refine those down, and then I would just feed that out to my field channel and just make money, because it's a win-win. We're identifying things that have a high likelihood of much more expense later, but we're also generating work for our services team.
Oh, yeah.
So personally, I don't think they should charge, and I think that's the biggest issue, is they want to make that SaaS money. Because I want to make that SaaS money. If I can figure out how we do training as SaaS, it's great, because as a business owner, it's predictable. Joe, you remember when you ran a business. It's great to have predictable revenue. It makes planning easy.
Especially in a seasonal industry like we have. You've got to have predictable revenue.
Winter work,
But it creates a barrier. Now, let me ask you this. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Do you all think that any of this has to do with if we put analytics and these solutions into a facility, it's going to show they are not doing their jobs?
It could. Yeah, it definitely.
Well, it could be an unforeseen issue. There's just a wild card that comes about in the system. That's really not their fault,
And so you got a few different things at play to answer that. One, I mean, if they're not doing their jobs, what do we mean? They're not changing filters, they're not greasing bearings, or was the install the problem? most of the failures are installation issues anyway. And that contractor puts in, he's gone. Nobody knows better. Nobody knows whether he's purged his lines with nitrogen while he was brazing, whether he pulled a good vacuum. And then later on, you start seeing problems in the system. So it would be kind of hard to finger point a lot of times. Again, until we get good back with AI, and maybe it can learn and it can start finger pointing a little earlier.
And you kind of get into that thing with AI where everybody thinks it's taking their jobs away, which some job task it does, but if we can use it to help us. The maintenance departments need to see this as a tool that's going to help them predict failures, not something that's going to take their job away. That's something that people need to learn, that stuff there.
Yeah, how to use it.
Going back to your original, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, no, go ahead.
Going back to your original point, Phil. So we already kind of do that in homes with our smart thermostats. They can, with the homeowner's permission, in quotations, it can send information to that contractor. That contractor will get an alert saying this system is in an alarm right now. It's an alert, just like in building automation, and help generate those call outs like you're talking about. So that's it's already happening some.
This is going to be embarrassing, but especially since I have this persona of being a person who knows a lot about controls. But went and put an Ecobee. Michael, I think you were here when I did this, so you probably know this story. I moved to this house, and I was so excited that I was going to finally have my smart thermostat, because the house in Wisconsin had multi-zone geothermal heat pumps. So I couldn't put in a smart thermostat. There was no smart thermostat that could do that. So I was like, yes, I get to put in the Ecobee. It's 3 a.m. Our daughter comes into our room drenched in sweat, crying, and is like, it's so hot. And I'm like, I step out into the main area. It's 90 degrees.
Oh, jeez.
And I'm just like, what in the world? And I go to the Ecobee and I'm in all the settings, and no matter what I do, I can't get it to turn off heat. The wiring's right. I just can't get the heat. And someone's probably listening to this and be like, you're an idiot. It's just this. But I'm so used to being able to go into a controller, see what the programming's doing, know exactly why in line code or graphical programming. But I don't know where I was going with this, but
you have none of that in
it's hard to troubleshoot. Yeah,
it's all proprietary.
Yeah. So here's my thing: is these systems, they're complex, and so one of the issues I see with predictive maintenance is, just because the points are saying something, unless the software can see into the program and understand why, I don't know how it's going to know, because simultaneous heating and cooling is okay in a dehumidification scenario, but it's not okay in another.
Yeah, but that humidification mode point, that software point, will go to the AI cloud model to determine
if there's a humidification.
If there's humidification, yes, correct.
Yeah. So speaking of that, let's move on to AI in buildings. So we've seen some interesting stuff with Grok and with ChatGPT. We did a podcast where we put in a sequence of operations and we had it write Siemens PPCL code. How do you all see AI in the next 2 years? Because I know you all work with it on a day-to-day basis. What do you think?
Well, I could start on that. I think right now it's starting to get momentum, and I think within 2 years it's going to be very common, and especially in Fortune 500 companies. They're the ones that are adopting this first, based on what I've seen, and I see it mainly used for energy efficiency and some predictive maintenance. I mean, as far as that goes, it's a good technology. Like I said before, it's not something that's going to really take jobs away. It'll take tasks away to help us do our jobs better. That's the way I see it. At first, I was thinking it would take all our jobs away. So I'll admit that. But now I see it as differently, because every building's different. Every technology is different that they have in their buildings. And and they have different goals, financial goals to reach, energy efficiency, and also, for their customer to have a good environment to work in.
Yeah, and I can see it a lot on the auto buildings, so like your data centers and systems like that just need a constant or maybe slightly varied. I can see it saving a lot of energy being able to control the schedules for data centers and buildings like that, especially.
It's already being used a lot just in general for programming, going back to Phil's point.
Sure.
It may have a big role there where the actual programming becomes more you upload a sequence of operation and maybe it does the programming for you, just text the program kind of application. So
yeah, I think it would be nice to like scan a sequence and then build a block program automatically from that and make an estimate too, make a sales estimate or proposal, all that fun stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
And even like security wise, I mean, we're starting to see like Mission Impossible style where you scan your face or your eye or anything like that.
Yeah.
So AI is even trickling down to that.
Sure.
Yeah. Or the security guards, we could have robot security guards.
T800.
Yes, exactly. We control through our building automation system.
So I'm going to share something. So I just grabbed a random graphic off of Google and I threw it in GPT.
That was quick.
And I said, write a sequence for me. Imagine, imagine this. Imagine you are a person going to a site to do a retro commissioning opportunity. And you need to go analyze the site. And you take a bunch of screenshots of their BAS front end because they don't have the BAS documented. And you just throw it in ChatGPT.
Wow.
Let's try this. Create a points list for physical and logical points.
Yeah, if it'll make like a points list.
Yeah.
So it is.
List out AI, BI, AV. Let's try this.
Yeah, this would be good when you're doing a job walk for a retrofit too as well. You could just kind of input, so if it's a constant volume air handler, and it'll spit out a sequence if there's not existing control diagrams there.
Right.
Let's see what it does here.
Yeah, because you don't always get the existing drawings.
Sometimes
Very
you get
rarely.
lucky.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe a digital copy now.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if this is going to trick it.
Oh yeah. There's the Python code.
Interesting. Yeah, look, it figured out BOs, even though I didn't tell it BOs. Now let's see if we can actually put it into a table. I've generated a table. So the table's generating. It's going to be a little slow because we're streaming right now. I'm going to tell it, create a bill of materials with
that'd be neat.
Recommended devices for each physical point. So like if we look at this, I mean, here's the list of points now. It's created the points list. So if we really wanted to, we could, and then once we're done with this, we could say, create a single prompt that will do everything that you've done so far based on this graphic. And then we use that prompt each time we upload a graphic, and it'll do all of this.
Yeah, the only problem with a single graphic, though, how could I have? It doesn't know the sequence of operation based off of just a graphic, though, right? I mean, you could run it any number of ways. It could definitely pull out points for sure.
Look at you, negative Nancy. It's closed. No, I'm just messing. You're absolutely right, Joe. It is. You're correct. Like there will be all sorts of things that it won't be able to pull. I did like that it noticed that that's an airflow monitoring station.
Yeah.
And it pulled airflow and it knew to go down here and grab like wires.
Wow.
And I wonder if we could, it even pulled the type of drive. So I wonder if like we could go, so then I could say, write a single prompt that will generate everything you've done so far. And while I take the sharing off, while I stop sharing, so I'm going to hide that. I'm going to grab a different graphic while you all talk. What did you all think about that?
I thought it was good, but it looks like it has more work to do. But obviously, if an OEM gets a hold of something like this, they can train that model to make it more accurate and better, and make their tables look cool and make it standardized. So, but that's just with our regular Chat GPT. So,
Right.
Yeah.
I think utilizing it in that way is great. I don't know if it's completely there yet, but it's definitely in the right direction.
Yeah, Matt, as an engineering standpoint, what do you think when you're designing and you're creating that sequence of operation? Do you think there's any promise there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that looked pretty solid from that aspect. It's able to take the idea and lay it out like that. I don't see anything wrong with that aspect.
So I grabbed this graphic right here, which is a chiller plant, it looks like. And we're going to throw it in here and see what happens.
Also see that on a sales standpoint for the customer, it gives them, if they just want to have a general sequence with the general system layout versus a specific, like an OEM locked in, this gives them a fair, bidding opportunity.
I wonder what it would be like if you could link it all to like all your design criteria, like all the ASHRAE standards, everything that you would do as a designer. If you could just have it linked to all that and say, "Hey, design me, a system for this building."
That's a good point. How specific could you get?
Yeah.
And if it would be able to be accurate with those specifications, that's a great question.
And again, I think it's a matter of time. It learns over time, and the more and more you do, it, the more familiar it gets.
Right.
Is it right? Whoever's writing the AI obviously would have to write it focused more on that application instead of just like we said, our Chat GPT. We're just throwing random stuff in there, and it's still doing a good job.
What did you want it to do? Include ASHRAE 30 guideline 36.
What is guideline 36?
Any guideline, all guidelines.
ASHRAE standards. Guideline standards
for chill water control. If you're doing the chill water plant.
Let's see. It had trouble processing this image. I think I fixed it.
Yeah, it's crazy. It can extract information from an image.
Directly extract from that image. Okay. So there's an issue with that image. I have to find a different one. Hold on here. So I don't know what the issue is with that image, but let's just try this one.
That's a very busy area.
What if it's like a JPEG or a PNG or something?
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
It's got to be the image type.
Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of going back to it, whoever writes it, if they wrote it specifically for this type of application, they could make it recognize those images.
This one worked. Let's, we're not going to make the audience watch, so I'll hide this while it works and we'll move on to a new topic real quick, and then we'll come back to this one. But biggest area of concerns. So Michael and Joe, now you both have run workforce development cohorts. That's our program that takes someone and turns them into a job chargeable tech in 11 weeks, 80% job chargeable in 4 weeks. So for those of you listening who like money and you need to generate revenue and you like generating profitable revenue, because anyone can put a person on a job and generate revenue with no profit, then definitely check out our workforce development program, which will be in the links attached to this episode. So with that being said, Joe, Michael, what have you all seen, like training new techs? What has been surprising to you? All of that.
Joe, you want to go first?
Yeah, I will. So I recently did a couple of podcasts on this topic, how to recruit and how to train, with the mindset of, you don't have to wait for someone to have 2 years of experience in there to bring them in to your commercial application and start training them as a technician, right? For me, I don't believe that people are any different now than they ever were. Some kids, some youngsters still like to be outside. They still like working with their hands. They still like that feeling of accomplishment. Maybe they just haven't realized it yet because they've always been on electronics their whole lives, right? So I think my philosophy has always been, if you can get the fundamentals down of what we do, then you can teach anybody anything in our industry.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just with my experience in the classroom, I think, in my opinion, they learn differently based on the generations they come up in because they're raised in different environments. Gen X, I was raised without a smartphone, and we had one computer, in my middle school, we grew up. So technology was lacking.
You played Oregon Trail on it, right?
Yes, I did that. It was DOS.
Oregon Trail was awesome.
So anyways, this new generation, they're practically born with smartphones and technology.
Yeah.
And that's good and that's bad. It's good because they automatically know how to use computers when they get into class. You don't have to teach them how to do all this stuff. And they know how to turn things in on the LMS and things like that. However, their attention span has been affected with this from what I've seen in studies I've read. So Gen Z, this is the 20-year-old generation here. If you're training these people here, you're going to have to change it up every 5 to 10 minutes. You can't just talk about something just for 5 minutes or less. And you got to keep them moving too. You got to keep them hands-on because that's what they like to do. They're always on the phones, touching things and doing all kinds of stuff. They got to be interactive. That's what we do in our labs, in our classes. We teach for a little bit, and then we get them into a lab. We teach for a little bit, get them back to doing something else. Because if you don't, you're going to lose your class. They're going to be uninterested. They're going to be immobilized, and they'll probably quit, because there's a lot of information in our field that they have to learn very quickly and all the time throughout their career. So that's just some things that I've kind of noticed there.
I have a question then. So on that, have you seen a difference based on generation, even though every generation now in the last 10 years has a smartphone, has a laptop? We all use the same technology now. Now, maybe somebody grew up with it, but so I'm kind of in the middle there. And I remember not having a smartphone and not only having one computer, but I also, my college years did have a smartphone. And so I'm kind of in the middle where some of my learning was without that and some of my learning was with that. So is there really a difference in the last 10 years if we're all using the same technology? Have you seen that difference?
Yeah. So, I have some older people in our classes. And, I don't know if it's just because of the age, but, like me, sometimes we're a little bit slower on catching some things onto things. Like we're generations, the Xennials. We're between millennials and Gen X. So we grew up without smartphones, but we had to learn to use them as we went to high school and college.
Exactly.
So we're kind of like, we can do both. That's kind of an advantageous generation because we could do both. Some of them were, they had to learn computers when they were adults, when they were late in their 30s, like the Gen X and people like that. So that's just kind of what I've seen.
So I've spent, 10 years teaching HVAC at the college level. And so we had the whole generations. We had people from 15 sometimes that were doing dual enrollment in high school, but most of them were 18 to early 20s. And then I'd have some 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on. And the success of the student to me had nothing to do with their age. It was all about personality. That's why I say a lot of times we put too much emphasis on generational differences. Although Michael is correct. The older gentlemen or ladies would pay a lot more attention. They would take notes. They would be a lot better in the field or the lab with their hands on. And the younger people, exactly like he said, if I've been up there lecturing for 10 or 15 minutes, they're taking pictures of each other's with filters, making them look bald and snapping them to each other. And they're all laughing about all this stuff. It goes back to what he said, the attention span. And I also heard something interesting where we think that this new generation is a lot better with technology than we are, but they're a lot better with social media than we are. You get them on a spreadsheet, they're totally confused. You get them programming. It's different.
It's culturally based.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you bring that point up because one of the things I read very recently was how, and granted, this is probably written by a millennial, so it's probably biased, but the thing I read is that the millennials actually have a great advantage because we grew up in the era when this technology didn't exist. And then when it did exist, so we got to see the transition, and we got to see it being implemented into society, which is a key point. Like, I talk to my kids and they're smart, but they struggle to use some like basic terminology or technology or think through things in a logical way.
Yeah.
I will also say, I think maybe it was Michael, who said it about the older generation tend to pay attention. I would say that's if they're engaged and bought in.
Yeah.
And I know that's true about anyone, but I've run into plenty of people of that generation who believe that people have to just learn it by doing their time. And their approach to learning is, I had to learn on the job through the hard way, so you should too, because it's not just about learning, it's also about the cultural acceptance of learning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, especially for our industry, because I mean, you're going to have to you're responsible for your learning in this career. And sometimes your employer might pay for that and enroll you, and sometimes you might have to learn on your own if it's not available. So, and that's a very good point. Yep.
It's a very valid point, but let me also counterpoint it with this. What do you do when it just don't work? What do you do when they quit and you have no workforce?
True.
And that's your option. We either crumble as society or we give in to the people who don't want to learn the old school ways.
So very true.
Yeah. I have to adapt.
Well, I think that we have to go and be like, I see this more on the owner operator side, where they've been maintaining systems 30, 40 years, and that person is now retiring or, God forbid, dying. And they had no plan at all to go and train that person, to go and think through, hey, how do we go and develop that person who's going to be replacing the person with all the legacy knowledge? And then they're in full-on panic mode because you can't buy the parts off eBay. No, it's been discontinued. And IT is shutting them down because they're running like Windows XP. I'm going to go back to AI in buildings. Here we go. And let's look at the results. So it got most of it. And then I'm going to show you something that I thought was pretty cool, but I'm a nerd. So it got everything except for the ASHRAE guidelines.
Oh.
So it got the sequence. It got the points list.
Nice.
Yeah.
It got the bill of materials. And then I asked it a question that I already knew the answer to, but I was curious if it would be smart enough to figure it out. Based on the naming structure of these points, what BAS control system do you think this is? Because I noticed this is totally Johnson Controls naming standards. HTG-O, OAH-T. This is classic Metasys naming standards. So I asked it, and booyah! It knew.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
I was like,
Bose Johnson Controls naming. Wow.
The pop-up info, pop-ups, and blue gradient with 3D air handler visualizations resemble Metasys Graphics Plus or the MRE graphics package. Yeah.
Wow.
I was really surprised that it was able to pull this out.
Wow. You could just take a picture and say what system. That's impressive.
Now, I don't know if this would work with others, or like if someone with a Siemens system just decided to name it Johnson kind of type. But yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. All right. Let's talk about the final topic here that we'll do, which will be IP switches in buildings for IP control. So, Michael, for one of the OEMs it looks like got final approval to create a new IT course for them. one of the issues I've been racking my brain against, and I've been trying to, I understand IT, I understand networking fairly well, but where I got an email the other day or a LinkedIn message from someone who I was connected with, and they said, hey, what switches would you use for an IP control system? And all I could think of was, and so hopefully the audience will chime in and be like, Phil, there's this, 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 and this. And maybe you all know something. All I could think of was Optigo and then the Cisco industrial switches. That's literally all I could think of, because here's the deal. When you build a building, you go and you have to do the network, right? You got to build the network. But the problem is, especially if you're going to do IP controls, the problem is the customer's IT network does not get put in until typically after certificate of occupancy, because they don't want to put all their switches in until they know that the building's going to stay conditioned, because they don't want to damage switches and all that jazz. So how do you put in an IP control system, specifically IP switches, that can go into a customer's network, that will be accepted by a customer's network? One school of thought is this is really no different than having a supervisory device with dual NICs. It's just a switch now. But I don't know. What do y'all think? What are you seeing in your classes? What are you hearing?
I'm not really hearing anything in my classes because IP addressing is really new to a lot of them. There might be a few people that have a background in it, but it's pretty new. But I will say, I don't know very much about the different brand names and how they differ and all that stuff. But I will say I used to be very uncomfortable with the backnet over IP or any kind of IP. But when I've been working with it now more, because I left the field in 2005, I became an estimator, I think. And that's when IP started getting real popular. But now that I'm using it, I see the power in it and how easy it is to implement and how more reliable it is than MSTP that we used to really suffer. And we had comlink issues and things like that. And I really appreciate that new technology and how it's becoming more accepted. IP
controls, in my opinion, specifically backnet, if I could speak, those are so much easier than MSTP.
Oh yeah.
MSTP is just unnecessarily complex.
Yep.
What interested me was I was reading the exit surveys, and people said that we went too deep into IP on workforce development.
Right.
And then I did the follow-up calls with the students 3-6 months later, and they're like, we're so thankful that you all taught us all this IP stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So it's interesting to me that I see that on the service side. They're like, we don't need to know this IP stuff. And then they're like, thank God we know, because we're trying to figure out why our chiller is not able to connect.
Right.
Yep. And that's my attitude as well. Yeah. Before I came to work for you, Phil, that was my attitude because I wasn't familiar with it.
Yeah.
It makes me think of students when they're learning wiring schematics. They don't like learning that. They think, well, I can't read this on paper. I just need to look at the wires in person. But then once they know how to do it and they get out in the field, they see the value of that. They're like, okay,
translates.
Yeah, man, I wish I had a schematic on everything. So I think with the IP addressing, that was kind of new for me, learning the IT side as well. And I'm thankful that I did. I guess they're used to being handed a list of addresses they can use, right? So they think by us telling them how all that works out with the subnetting and everything, maybe that's too deep. But you're absolutely right. When you try to set that stuff up and you understand it, it makes a world of difference instead of you banging your head against a wall just saying, why isn't this working? Versus actually looking at it and figuring it out.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that I think we as an industry, we tend to get stuck in what we know and what we've experienced, and just, that isn't my job. I don't need to know that until you get put on that service call or on that project. And then it real quickly becomes your job. And then you're actually a burden to your team because now you've got to call your senior tech all the time. And then what happens behind the scenes is we talk to leaders who are like, we're so frustrated that our senior techs are being burdened so much, and we need to figure out a way to solve this because they see that it's impacting their margin and their profitability. So let's do this. We're at about an hour. That went fast.
Wow. Yeah.
What's one closing kind of comment you all have?
Joe, do you want to start?
No, you just did, so you'd be last, right?
No, I can go. I was trying to be.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
I think this is a lot of good discussion with the new technologies, analytics, AI, and IP. One thing I'll add to the IP too as well is like it gains credibility when you're talking to the IT professionals at your customer job site. You go up there and ask for an IP or to put all your devices on the network. You don't even know what a subnet mask is or a host range. They're not going to have very much confidence in you putting your stuff on their system. So that's one thing I'd like to add to that. And just, embrace the new technologies. Don't fear of it taking away your job. It's just going to take away some tasks that you might not want to do. And it can actually help you sell more and get more business if you're smart about it. And also help the customers, improve their efficiencies. So
yeah,
that's all I got to add.
Definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely, just reiterate that and just understand that it's coming. That technology and that AI is going to happen. So the quicker you embrace it and understand it and utilize it, the quicker you're going to be on board and not have to fight it and refute whatever comes, because it's coming regardless what you're going to do or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would say don't panic too much over it. Would be my message to people. Technology, going back to Phil's point, we've been talking about similar stuff for 20 years. It advances fast, but it can only advance as fast as we can handle it as people. So it'll take some time getting used to it and implementing it, just like smartphones did. They were completely foreign. They were aggravating to use when they first came out. I'm like, where's my hang up button? Why is my screen black? How do I hang up a call? But you learn and you adapt to it.
So I've been wrong on every timeline estimate I've made. So I'm going for that streak here. But I think in the next 2 years, programming and design are going to be automated by technology. I think programmers' roles and designers' roles will be to check the output. But it'll actually be able to process SOPs and then write them. I mean, we saw what a unsophisticated LLM ChatGPT could do. Imagine a dedicated AI system, to Michael's point, that's trained. I think in the next 10 years, maybe sooner, the robots are going to replace a lot of the manual labor. I mean, there's already a Boston Dynamics video of it putting what look like circuit cards, but you could imagine those being filters into slots and it dynamically learning on its own, hey, this doesn't fit that way. I need to adjust and changing. So hop, skip, and a jump to filter change. Valve change out. I know you don't agree. I'm telling you, Joe, this is
interesting.
Yeah,
I think it's one thing on a manufacturing plant, but it's a different thing to put one on every piece of equipment in every building.
I don't know though. So have you tracked? Yeah. Okay. So I was going to wrap this up, but we're going to go just a little. NVIDIA.
I think we should.
Okay. So Joe, you talked about the Microsoft quantum computing chip in our pre-call. We didn't have a chance to go into that, nor do I think any of us are experts on that. But basically, Microsoft invented a fourth form of matter that I don't remember what it's called, but it's basically like a donut. And you could put a million. Yeah, you could put 1 million of these. Oh, what are they called?
Qubits.
What do they call them? Qubits. You could put 1 million qubits. And what I read is the 1 million qubits is equal to if we covered the surface of the Earth in the most advanced server that we have. So hearing that, now the theory is, so then you have NVIDIA. NVIDIA invented 3D virtual landscapes to train robots. So instead of having to have a robot go into every customer's backyard, you could, in theory, pump Google Earth into that environment and put a bunch of just air handlers sideways, all sorts of stuff, all sorts of configurations. and you could train the robot. And this is what I've read. I don't know if this is accurate. Once again, not a quantum expert, but in theory, you could instantly train the AI for these robots on every possible scenario, because there's a finite amount of scenarios that they have. And you could train them on every possible scenario and then reduce it down to the most likely scenarios and have the robots now trained on how to install things. But who's going to be the first one? Because once one company does it, every company is going to do it, because that one company is going to become so much more profitable than every other company. So that's my 2 cents. What do you think? Once again, I've been wrong on every future prediction I've made. So yeah, there's that.
Yeah, I mean, 15 years ago, these smartphones were not very common. So just think about the technology and the way our lives have changed in just 15 years, right? Sure. And I saw that Boston Dynamics robot do a backflip off a staircase. And I don't know many technicians that can do that. But, and like I said before, these are things that are going to help us do tasks that we don't want to do. And it frees us up to do more things. So you got to think of it that way. We got to supervise these robots and make sure they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, so. I think the biggest leap that has to come, and it may grow exponentially once that barrier's been broken, kind of like Phil's saying, but is going from an information world to a physical world. That's always been, 2025, we're going to have flying cars and all this stuff. Well, we don't, but we do have electric cars, self-driving cars.
So Back to the Future promised us that.
Exactly. So. Yeah, I think that'll be the big barrier once we really get good at transitioning from just technology to physical.
Yeah, true.
Hey, folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was valuable for you. I hope you liked the new format. Let us know in the comments section. Just hit what you think. Tell us, this was great, not so great, whatever. Just let us know. As always, everything will be available at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/485. Once again, that's podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/485. Go there. You can find access to a ton of free mini courses, webinar recordings. You can find access to our podcast archive, our free technical skill assessment, as well as all of the courses we offer, including our workforce development cohort, which there's a couple seats left for cohort 12. So definitely look if you're wanting to get new technicians up to speed and 80% job chargeable in 4 weeks. That's the program that'll do it for you.